all of this stuff comes from cholesterol. And when you have a deficit of it, what do you get? Well, suddenly you start getting moodiness. You start getting men who have no muscle mass. You start getting women who have PMS pain and PCOS pain, which should have never happened before.
Blaise, how did you find carnivore?
Well, that's a good question, Dave. So first, I started off actually not with carnivore itself, but I started off with intermittent fasting and keto. So I started it at around 2020. And that was the moment where I ended up doing intermittent fasting and keto for about 2 years. And I was going on and off, and it was like really, really difficult because I was trying to figure out like what's exactly going on. Finally, got lucky, and I found somebody talking about plant phytotoxins, specifically Anthony Chafee. And he was talking about plant phytotoxins. He was like, hey, plants are really carcinogenic and they don't want you to eat them. And I sort of like looked at a little bit of the data behind it, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I got curious. I did a little more research myself, and then I said, like, all right, we'll just cut out plants completely because apparently I don't need them and they're toxic. So I tried it, and it worked really well. So that was my short journey of just getting carnivore, and it was really, really amazing. Now, not only that, my results. So, for instance, like the quick things that it really did manage to fix were my acne. I used to have acne all over my face. It was absolutely terrible. I also had gut autoimmune problems. I don't know if I had it to the same level than Kent carnivore, experiencing a situation where I probably felt like I was genuinely about to die. It was pretty bad. The pain was so excruciating that I almost accepted death. I was looking up at the sky at like 12 o'clock at night, and I was like, if I die today, then I die. The pain was really bad. So it got rid of that completely. I wasn't really expecting that as well. It helped with brain fog. That was really, really a big thing because I would always like not be able to focus and concentrate too well. It helped me with my chronic fatigue, and I would always be tired. Even though I was an athlete, I was pretty much tired for the most part. Like I would just be exhausted for no reason or be tired for no reason. That just went away just like that. My anxiety as well also went away. I wasn't expecting that. That was sort of shocking. It was a little bit strange because I looked at that and I went, well, why exactly is my anxiety going away? Like, this isn't like, not only is am I feeling less stress, and I'm also feeling less anxiety, and like, what's going on? So that really interested me. And I was like really behind it because after that, I was like, yes, definitely. And not only that, there was something in my carnivore journey that there was two things actually. So first, was me deciding that if this carnivore thing really does work, because everybody says, oh, your ancestors always ate meat and only meat, and they didn't have to brush their teeth. And I heard that all the time. And I was like, you know what? We're going to put that to the test. And I'm going to risk my teeth to see if that's true or not. But let's see if it's true. So I said, okay, well, we're just going to stop brushing our teeth from now, and we're going to see if we get a cavity. And I did this for about 2 years. I'm still doing this actually right now. And about a year in, my parents finally noticed, specifically my mom. She one day asked, hey, are you going to go to the bathroom and brush your teeth before you go to bed? And I'm like, Mom, didn't you notice? I haven't brushed my teeth in literally an entire year. Like, did you not notice this? And she got like panicked. She freaked out and stuff like, oh my God, Blaise, what are you doing? So she suddenly decided, okay, well, if this is true, then what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to see what the dentist has to say. So she ends up finally bringing me to the dentist. I go to the dentist, and the dentist ends up saying, hey, so I see that you filled out every question here, except when was the last time you brushed your teeth? Why is that? And then I said, well, the reason is because I wanted you to guess, and I wanted you to tell me when was the last time you think I brushed my teeth. So he said, okay, well, I'll take a little guess. And he looked at my teeth for about 3 minutes. And he said, okay, well, looks like you brush pretty common, actually. I don't see any plaque on them. Your teeth look pretty healthy. And that was the moment where I knew I was doing something right, because that completely contradicted everything that I have been taught my entire life, especially when it comes to brushing my teeth. Not only that, I already started not showering before, which was something that I saw from an Australian guy, oddly enough. That was really weird. And this Australian guy basically said, hey, I haven't showered for 5 years and nobody's actually noticed, and I'm doing pretty good. So I was like, an Australian guy saying this on TV. He was on the news thing too. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll try it. I might as well try this, right? Like, I'm willing to experiment. This stuff is just so weird. So I tried it. I tried it actually 4 years ago, and I'm still doing it to this day. And I got a pretty crazy thing on that coming soon. So yeah, I relate it to the gut microbiome. I don't think the gut microbiome is the only microbiome. I think there's a microbiome in your mouth as well as your skin, and when you can like affect that. So yeah, that's my journey. That's
Wow. So, the total time you've been carnivore is how long?
about 2 years now. I'm getting pretty close to 3 already. So
Okay.
yeah.
And your last shower was when?
So the last time I actually took a shower was about 4 years ago, oddly enough, getting pretty close to 5. And yeah, it's been pretty amazing because nobody's noticed. And I do plan on making a video to see if anybody can tell. I'll go to my college campus and I'll basically interview the college students and I'll be like, hey, can you guess? And if they guess right, then I'll give them $20. And if they guess wrong, no $20. So
So at the time you it sounds weird to say this, started stopping showering, that you were already doing intermittent fasting or keto.
yes. Yes, so that was the point where I was going through some form of ketosis or some form of fat burning anyways, and I got really lucky. Actually, I think that probably is one of the main reasons as to or one of the key factors as to why I'm not smelling as much, especially when you go carnivore, because I've noticed a lot of other people also say, I don't know why I don't seem to smell much on carnivore. This is sort of weird. So that was I do think it has something to do with ketosis. I'm not entirely sure. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it does seem to be related to that. So yeah.
So you obviously you've experienced a lot of these changes and you're very young still to even be finding this, right? Because most people your age, I know when I was your age, I'm like, running around eating pot noodles and drinking Coke and stuff like that. But you've got to the point where you're doing a lot of research about this as well. So, what have you found as far as why all this is working?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so first I did actually start pretty young. Luckily, I started around 22 years old. So I'm really, really happy I managed to do that. The reason probably was because I was just so interested in science, and my dad sort of has like a medical background. And I always kind of thought you could probably cure everything with just like diet, or I thought maybe not necessarily diet, but some sort of like changing your environment, like being healthier in some way. Because I didn't think like all of this stuff was natural, and there had to have been something that I was missing because it didn't seem like humans would just be born and have problems. This doesn't like in terms of an evolutionary perspective, it makes no sense. And I did do a little bit of digging, quite a bit of digging actually. I spent probably for quite a bit of time. Within 2 years, some days I would be working or just learning for 12 to 14 hours every single day, trying to figure out the science behind it. Why exactly is it working? Why does this do this? Why does that do that? I was trying to see the other argument as well, because there's also this argument of like, oh, vegan is healthy, and I was like, well, is this really true? Is there any sort of merit to plants at all that I can find? And I couldn't find it. I really genuinely couldn't find any benefit to any sort of plant material at all. And so there actually I have a playlist. It's called The Science Behind Carnivore, and I plan on covering every single thing that covers the why carnivore works. And there's 19 things that I'll talk about. So first, phytotoxins. So you probably might have already heard a little bit about phytotoxins. Anthony Chafee's really big on this, and yeah, he it's because he took one of his professors was always about this, and he was like, plants are trying to kill you, and that's a really big deal. So I sort of learned about that and him talking during that lecture, and I was like, that's really, really interesting. So I did my own research, and yes, phytotoxins are insanely inflammatory, really, really inflammatory. Now, just to give an example of how some of this might work, for instance, lectins would open the tight junctions in your stomach, which, by the way, that's not something that you want. They're called tight junctions for a reason. They're not supposed to be loose, so it sort of loosens the tight junctions. You don't want that. And that's really, really a big deal, especially when it comes to people with gut autoimmune problems. There's cyanogenic glycosides, and those inhibit cytochrome C during oxidative phosphorylation, which is a really big deal because oxidative phosphorylation is how you get energy. And if you inhibit oxidative phosphorylation. You're getting no energy. So, and the things that include cyanogenic glycosides, just for instance, would be something like apple seeds. It could be an apricot seed. You're probably not going to eat that. It could be almonds. Nuts do seem to contain these. So I was sort of like, oh, that I didn't know that. Like, that's kind of interesting. So that's cyanogenic glycosides. There's also oxalates. I mean, probably many of people have already heard of oxalates before. Oxalates are really, really bad because they will not just cause problems within the body, they will also hinder nutrient absorption. So it's a 2-in-1 phytotoxin. It's kind of like a kill two birds with one stone. You don't, you definitely don't want that. It'll inhibit like calcium absorption. Pretty much a lot of the minerals, oxalate has a really strong affinity towards. So it'll just steal it and prevent you from having it. That's not good. There's so many phytotoxins, and they all cause these inflammatory signals. Now, another way that they can do it was basically they will bind to the outside of a carbohydrate on your cell, and it'll trigger this autoimmune response, and your body will freak out because it'll do something called molecular mimicry, and it'll mimic a certain signal that your body understands as like this is inflammatory. So it freaks out, and I don't know if this is, again, you might have to cut this out. I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but inflammation I sort of view as like a meth addicted neighbor who's trying to help you, because it always causes problems in the process. So that's why you don't want to stimulate inflammation. Like, sure, he's helpful because he can like help around the house, or maybe he can clean up the yard, but like in the process he might like break something by accident, or do something like that. So whenever it's stimulating this inflammatory response, it's not like it's good for your body. It's not like there's no consequence, right? So that's sort of how I view inflammation, and why you don't want to be stimulating inflammation from these phytotoxins, because it's like not really healthy. The second thing that I was going to be talking about was this is also related to plants, because once again, plants seem to basically have this exact set of compounds that you want to avoid, is glucose. Now, it might not sound like glucose is that big of a deal, but turns out glucose is a little bit more of a deal than you might think. And the reason is because glucose isn't just regular glucose. There's three forms of glucose. There's alpha D glucose. There's beta D glucose. They're glucopyranose, but I'll just say glucose. And there's D glucose. Now, D glucose is really damaging because it causes glycation and stuff. And glycation, it'll inhibit or basically make or render whatever it attaches to useless. And that's not good, because your body has to replace that, or maybe even quite literally salvage everything and just kill itself. The cell has to kill itself. It's not good for your body at all. And not only that, plants don't just contain higher amounts of glucose, they also contain higher amounts of fructose. And fructose does this, except it does this at 8 to 10 times the rate than glucose. And that's a big deal, because that's how you get your Alzheimer's in the first place. Like, if you ever wonder how that's happening, it's all because of AGEs, or AGEs. They're called advanced glycation end products. You definitely don't want those. Really, really bad. There's also the fact that glucose is, even though it's always touted to be very, very unhealthy and like, oh my God, glucose is really bad. If you actually look at a baby, for instance, when a baby is born, their blood glucose is so low. If you took that baby's blood sample, it is immediately reported to the doctor, because that is assumed that person is either in a coma or about to die, because their blood glucose is so low. It's like it's three times less than the average adult of today. It's ridiculously low. And why exactly is that? Because they're not using that glucose as fuel. They're instead using fatty acid and ketones. And babies, there's a Japanese paper actually that talks about this. Babies use ketones like primarily for their brain. They need that during brain development. And when you lower ketones amounts, you sort of also actually lower the baby's development, quite literally. So it's definitely not healthy for the baby. There's like a lot of other things that you can sort of show why glucose is a little damaging. Now, the third thing that I was going to talk about is something called reactive oxygen species. Now, I actually haven't heard about this one too much from other carnivore YouTubers, oddly enough, but reactive oxygen species is pretty much it's some sort of damaging off product. Usually it comes from oxidative phosphorylation, where your cell will try to make energy out of something, and suddenly something really toxic ends up getting basically shot out, and it's not really healthy for your cell. That's your reactive oxygen species. And that is the way that happens is NADH, specifically more NADH is made when you go through glucose oxidation instead of beta oxidation. Beta oxidation basically just means fat oxidation. More of that NADH is made, and that NADH goes to complex 1 in oxidative phosphorylation. And complex 1 is responsible for a lot of the electron leakage in oxidative phosphorylation. And plants, actually, there's a reason why plants are really high in antioxidants. It's exactly because of this reason. They're literally killing themselves at a really rapid rate. I'll probably explain that later, but yeah, that's a really, really big part of why you don't want to be oxidizing glucose, because you're actually killing yourself at an increased rate, because you're getting all of these hydroxyl free radicals. Usually they come from a superoxide, which is a oxygen molecule with a little dot on it, which basically means it's a free radical. And then that oxygen molecule turns into a hydrogen peroxide, and that hydrogen peroxide turns into a hydroxyl free radical, and that hydroxyl free radical will cause lipid peroxidation. It'll cause oxidative stress. It basically, whatever it attacks, it absolutely wrecks it, and you don't want that because it's really, really bad. Now, this is a really big deal, because when you're going through this glucose oxidation, you're sort of speeding up the rate of aging as well, and you probably don't want to be speeding up the rate of aging. There's some evidence. I'll talk about this as well. Humans probably lived around 120 to 150 years based on evidence specifically from Herodotus, where Herodotus asked the Ethiopian king, he was like, hey, no, well, no, it wasn't Herodotus. Oops. Damn it. It was the Persian king who asked the Ethiopian king, hey, what exactly is going on? Like, how are you doing? They talk a little bit. And then eventually the Persian king asks the Ethiopian king, how long do your people live? And the Ethiopian king basically tells him, our people live for 120 to 150 years. And the Persian king says his people only live from 70 to 80 years. And it's because of diet, because their diet was both completely different. And they state that. Herodotus chronicles that and states that. So that's one really big part. Another part is that if you look at the genomic data on that as well, the genomic data also says humans are supposed to live about 120 to 150 years. So that only furthers this possible theory, or a possible idea, at least maybe an observation or a hypothesis, that glucose really is the thing that's speeding up aging. And I think that's it might not seem like that big of a deal, but I mean, India's living for only like 67 years or 60 something years. It's a really, really low, and they're always eating plants. And Hong Kong is living to like 85 years old, and they're eating meat. They're eating a lot of pork. And that's, by the way, pork is probably if one of the possible worst carnivore foods, even though it's still so much better. Like, it's still really, I like the taste of pork, so I eat it. But it's, in general, when it comes to deuterium content and polyunsaturated fat content, that makes it more susceptible to cause this aging. It's just like, it's amazing. It goes to show just how much healthier meat is, and specifically beta oxidation. So that was another thing. So yeah, that's glucose oxidation. There's also the fifth thing, which is polyunsaturated fats. Now, polyunsaturated fats, for some reason, there's a lot of this talk of like, oh, omega-6s and omega-3s are healthy. Linoleic acid is really good for you because you really need that stuff. And if you really do a little bit of like digging and understand all of this, and then you also combine that with my previous thing that I just talked about, which was glucose oxidation, you would realize that really, really quickly, that is the last thing that you want to be adding to your diet. And it would actually be possibly a very good reason why many bodybuilders die and drop dead so early. And it's because of this insane amount of glucose concentration with these high amounts of polyunsaturated fats. Now, polyunsaturated fats, the reason they're really, really damaging. So, for instance, you might say, oh, well, linoleic acid is in plants and you really need linoleic acid. Well, if you look at linoleic acid and you actually compare it to the linoleic acid in animals versus the linoleic acid in plants, you would see that the linoleic acid in plants is way more inflammatory. And the reason is because linoleic acid will always get converted into arachidonic acid. And that arachidonic acid is insanely inflammatory. I mean, it is so inflammatory that you just don't want that. And the problem is you can avoid that, but you can't do that with plant linoleic acid. You can only do that with linoleic acid in its conjugated version. And linoleic acid in its conjugated version is what gives you your conjugated linoleic acid, which allows you to basically skip that super inflammatory part while you're converting it to arachidonic acid. So it's just like, it's less inflammatory. The process of it is less inflammatory. So Already, that's a really big thing as to why linoleic acid there's always this talk about like, oh well, you need linoleic acid because your body can't produce it, and it's like, yes, you can even find better versions of it in meat because it's more stable, once again. And then another thing is polyunsaturated fats, just from a general chemistry standpoint. If you look at polyunsaturated fats from a pure chemistry standpoint, you would realize that polyunsaturated fats are really, really damaging. And the reason is because polyunsaturated fats have a double bond, and that double bond allows for what's basically called a pi bond to be formed around it, which allows the delocalization of electrons. And that's a big deal because if you combine that with that free radical that I talked about before, that free radical always prefers to attack anything. Yeah, you guessed it. It's going to try to attack that delocalized set of electrons. And what lo and behold, what ends up happening when you attack that delocalized set of electrons, you get the polyunsaturated fat breaking, or you can even get a really toxic off product, really really toxic off product. I think an example could be like malonyl dialdehyde. It's like really 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 toxic. You don't want this stuff. And that once it damages it, let's say it's on the surface of your cell membrane. Well, suddenly now your cell ends up lysing, and lo and behold, what ends up happening when your cell lyses? Well, that means that all the contents of your cell go basically into your bloodstream, and that might not seem like that big of a deal until you realize that caspases are released, and caspases are your, once again, this stimulates inflammation, which is sort of like your meth addicted neighbor. It's not a good thing that you want because you don't want to be, you don't want his help that often. You want to avoid his help as much as you can. So he comes about and he freaks out because he sees caspases, and caspases are sort of like your body looking out into a window and seeing that like there's somebody who just died there recently. That's really scary for your cells because that sort of, it's no different than seeing a virus because that's what your cells interpret it as. It's almost like a virus killed it because the virus does the exact same thing. It lyses the cell and all these viral particles go flying about. So again, that's really, really unhealthy, and you don't want polyunsaturated fats because of this. Because when you combine that with glucose oxidation, it just gets even worse. It's really, really damaging.
Yeah, it's just crazy that there's so many things that can go wrong, and we're constantly told, yeah, just eat this processed junk, you'll be fine, no problem, no problem at all.
Yeah, I know it's amazing because what really amazes me is I look at this as like a scientist and I go, if there is, as a doctor, anybody in that field has to have taken chemistry, has to have taken biology, has to have probably, I hope they would have taken biochemistry. They would have taken all of these subjects, but they don't. Like it's almost like the school system, I don't know what it is, but has forgot how to actually teach them how to apply all of this information. Because if they applied it, this would all go away. This wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have this problem. We would look at this from just a pure chemistry standpoint, and this would go, this just doesn't sound good. Like you're causing this reaction to occur over and over again, and not only that, you're just adding more of it into your bloodstream. Like why would you do this? So I think there definitely needs to be some level of critical thinking that's increased because honestly, this I learned that I pretty much once I took one like not even all of biochemistry. I took like a little bit of biochemistry and immediately I was like, wow, this is kind of a big deal. Like I didn't realize this. I was lucky enough to learn a little bit about glucose oxidation on my own because they didn't cover it in biochemistry as much. They didn't cover, oh, it generates more reactive oxygen species. Oh, beta oxidation does this. Like you have to learn a little bit of it on your own, but it does sort of make you wonder because you learn these things in biochemistry like, hey, ATP made your ATP that's made from fatty acid is like 3 times more than your ATP made from glucose. And then that doesn't that trigger in anybody's brain like this? Like, why are we always told that glucose is the primary energy source then? Like if we're told that fatty acid produces way more ATP, why would we even want to use glucose? So it's this weird. It's weird because everybody says glucose is the primary energy source of the body. It's the primary energy source of the brain. It's like that doesn't make sense.
This reminds me, I saw a tweet yesterday from a doctor. It kind of reminds me of this, what we're talking about. It's like all these doctors go through medical school and they're all book smart, but it takes a special one to actually be able to convert those book smarts into like relating it to reality and doing some critical thinking. And
Yeah.
and I was thinking about this in the evening yesterday. I'm thinking, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that's actually how people are in most areas of life, whatever kind of profession you have. It's like, yeah, they can be smart, they can study, they get the best results. Like the people that do the best in math, for example, but then they go into a supermarket and they're paying for something at the register and they can't work out how to, give particular change. Everyone's had that experience. Everyone's had that experience with the person working on the cash register, where they say, okay, well, this costs $2.10, right? And you've only got a $5 note, so or a $10 note. So you give them a $10 note plus 10 cents, and they're like looking at you like, but hang on, it's only $2.10. You've given me too much. It's like, just put the money into the automatic register and it'll tell you how much change to give me. It's that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, you're really right. It's I think it has to do with there's this. I also actually my channel, I don't all plan on making just carnivore, because I think that education itself is just really important to understanding concepts. And one of the things that I plan on talking about eventually is being a so-called jack of all trades. I don't know if you might have heard the saying, jack of all trades, master of none, but often better than a master of one. And it's interesting because the reason why the at the very end it says better than a master of one. The reason is because he is able to take all of the, or from what I understand, he's able to take all of the general knowledge itself and apply it to real life, to apply it to something else. And I think that's really important, and that's completely underlooked, because if you don't try to apply all of these concepts that you learn to real life, in some sense, like, why are you learning them? I mean, sure, some things in physics are really cool, like really, really cool, but they don't give any real life application yet. Maybe yet they probably will eventually, but they don't give it yet. And it's like, yeah, it's just really, really important to be able to apply what you know to real life, because if you can't, why do it?
And it's like muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? So you forget those things that you learned, and then it just becomes, whatever the repeated message is, that what gets stuck in your head, right?
Yeah. Yeah, literally. I mean, yeah, it's like muscle memory. I mean, if you don't yeah. So for instance, like me playing basketball, I used to play basketball all the time, and my strength was dribbling. I was really, really good at dribbling. And I stopped playing basketball for like 6 years, and I try to get back to dribbling. Obviously, I can dribble good, but I can't dribble at the level that I used to, because I lost that muscle memory. So it's sort of like yeah, it's really, really important. I think it's really important to have not just a one-sided approach to all of this, because even if you say like carnivore is good, carnivore is clearly better, it's also sort of important to know why, because you might say like, well, maybe you can improve in carnivore in this way because you can add this in, or maybe you can add this in, or maybe you can add that in. And you have to understand like more of the mechanisms behind it in order to actually improve it, or whether or not carnivore can itself be improved. So yeah, I think it's really, really important just to apply what you learn. The seventh thing, by the way, in terms of the science behind carnivore works, has to do with essential vitamins, and vitamins pretty much not being bioavailable in plants versus being really bioavailable in animals. So just a really quick example, I could give like a couple things. One of them would be beta carotene. Now, beta carotene is always told like, oh, you need to eat your carrots to get your beta carotene because it's really good. It's like good vitamin A. You need your carrots. And then if you just compare that number to beef liver, for instance, and you compare the bioavailability, beef livers, like you would need to eat 100 grams of beef liver, and you would have to eat like 900 grams of sweet potatoes to get the same amount. Like nobody in their right mind is going to be eating 900 grams of sweet potatoes just to get enough vitamin A for the day. Like it doesn't, who would do this? Right? This makes no sense. So that's just an, that's just an example. It's ridiculous. if you look at the nutritional content, and it doesn't stop there because it keeps going. Like a really good example is plants. I don't know why exactly they do this, but in terms of evolution, they seem to have evolved this thing where they're always targeting your iron. And it's why vegans go anemic so quickly, because all of these plant phytotoxins and the concentration of certain minerals and vitamins end up literally leading to iron malabsorption or like almost no iron absorption. So, for instance, like phytates will basically they're a phytotoxin in plants, and they will just bind around this iron. They will form this complex around iron, and you can't absorb that iron anymore. So it's like, why would you go for it? And not only that, if you look at the iron content in meat versus the iron content in plants, once again, you see that the iron content in plants is around like 5 to 20% bioavailability, and the iron content in meat is 15 to 35%. So it's just ridiculously higher. And the worst part about it is it's just this compounding effect, because plants have so many of these other vitamins in such higher concentrations. Just as another example, vitamin C and vitamin E are really, really high in plants. And the problem is that with vitamin C and vitamin E being really, really high sometimes, that lowers the absorption for other vitamins and minerals. So you're not even getting the amount that you're supposed to. In fact, you're getting an excess of vitamin E when you don't need it, and that's not good for you. And you're getting like way less iron in the process. And it's like, why? Like this is not healthy, because you're not just the balance in vitamin and mineral interactions. Like every vitamin also indirectly will usually inhibit some sort of mineral or some sort of other vitamin, because they all compete sometimes for the same transporter. They don't all compete for the same transporter, but there's like specific transporters that are the exact same, and they have to compete for them. And what's even crazier about that is when it comes to vitamin C, you're always told you need your vitamin C because vitamin C is really healthy, and you can only get that from plants. And if you look at the vitamin C in animals, not only is it actually more bioavailable, there's less of it, so it doesn't have to compete with glucose, because glucose competes for the same thing than vitamin C or ascorbic acid. But dehydroascorbic acid doesn't actually have to compete for the same things than glucose has to, because it has more options to choose from. So you're getting actually more vitamin C absorption from eating meat. Like it's a really weird thing, especially if your insulin is really high, because if your insulin is really high, that means your blood glucose is really high. And lo and behold, what does that end up leading to? That end up leading to less vitamin C absorption. So even if you're taking all of these supplements for vitamin C, you're not going to get anything because your glucose is so high. And they're competing for the same thing. So yeah, that's really, really damaging. That's another thing that I always hear, and it's like, vitamin C, you need vitamin C, and it's like, let's really look at what vitamin C does. So you have to like really do a little bit of digging. That's just vitamin C. There's also another thing. So, for instance, this one is really weird, and I'm actually going to be explaining why plants kill themselves at such a rapid rate. Now, I talked a little bit about this before, but it has to do with the Rubisco enzyme. Now, plants, the reason why they have such high levels of antioxidants, and even though it's touted, oh, you really need antioxidants because it's really, really healthy for you and they're just good for you, right? Your polyphenols and your vitamin E and vitamin C, well, they all act as antioxidants. But the problem is the reason why that plant is producing so much of that antioxidant in such high concentrations is because, remember, they have high amounts of polyunsaturated fats. And also remember that polyunsaturated fats are very, very susceptible to lipid peroxidation. Now, why is that a big deal? Because if you look at the Rubisco enzyme, that Rubisco enzyme is constantly cranking out reactive oxygen species. It is really just creating tons of this stuff. So it's basically like it's killing itself almost quicker than the people kill themselves today with their diets. And the problem with that is the plant is like, I need to defend myself against myself because I'm killing myself so quickly during every single time I'm trying to make energy, because that Rubisco enzyme, it isn't super efficient. And sometimes 1 out of every 4 times, suddenly one reactive oxygen species is generated. And that's a problem because the plant has to make some sort of antioxidant to fight against that like hydrogen peroxide being made. And it needs to do that. So Once again, and what does that reactive oxygen species like to attack? It likes to attack polyunsaturated fats. And where is the highest amount of concentrations of polyunsaturated fats that you can find? They're always found in plants. So again, it's like there's a reason why plants produce these things. And it's not like they're necessarily unhealthy, but like it's important to understand why exactly they're doing this. And if you realize why they're doing that, you go like, oh, okay, then that's exactly why I probably don't want to eat them, because they're literally killing themselves at such a rapid rate. And they're producing tons of these things to protect themselves against themselves, as well as producing things to protect themselves against predators. I mean, it's endless. It's really, really damaging. So yeah, that's another thing that I don't hear much about as well. I don't hear many people talking about, oh, well, the reason why the plants produce all of this is because of that Rubisco enzyme. Yeah, it's because of that. So that's another thing. There's also fiber. Now, you probably always heard that argument, fiber is good for you. Fiber is really healthy. Well, if we really take a look at that statement and we see what exactly fiber does, fiber is just cellulose. So we can't really process this stuff in the first place. And the whole point of fiber actually existing for other animals, the reason why you see like a cow eat such fibrous grass is because they're converting that fiber into short chain fatty acids. They're using literally the same energy source than a carnivore. Carnivores use fatty acids. Like the herbivores use fatty acids. So this is clearly a thing. We should see this. We would look at this and go like, oh, well, clearly this must mean fatty acid is the main energy source. But no, once again, we're told it's glucose. So that's a really weird thing. And it doesn't just stop there, because fiber is way worse than just, oh, you can't digest it. It also causes, and especially if you have gut autoimmune problems, it will wreck your stomach. And I am a really great example, or Kent Carnivore is an even better example because he had his colon removed. But if we were to look at just the study on fiber that was done, the best study that ever, you can see that they had like 66 or 63 participants. And out of those 66 participants, they put them into three groups. It was either one group having extremely high loads of fiber, like really, really high fiber concentration. There's the second group, which had moderate fiber concentration or not really too much of it. And there was a third group who had absolutely no fiber. And they wanted to see whether or not increasing the fiber content would actually help these people with their problems. In this case, they had the problems of stomach pain, anal bleeding, constipation, stomach bloating, stomach cramps, all of these things. And lo and behold, if you look at the first group, the group eating all that fiber, all of their symptoms just went through the roof. They went completely out of this world. So it's really, really damaging for them. It's like, okay, well, maybe what about the middle group? Were theirs even higher? No, turns out theirs were even lower than that group. But well, what about the no fiber group then? The no fiber group had 0 cases. They didn't have a single problem of bloating, no constipation, no anal bleeding, no stomach cramps, no stomach pain whatsoever. So that's like a really big indicator. It's like, isn't that sort of the p-value in terms of a science perspective? The p-value for that study would be so high, it couldn't be ignored. It would just be like, this is insane. This is ridiculously high. So there's clearly something with fiber that's causing this damage. And yeah, it does. So all these people saying fiber is healthy, that's one more reason why fiber isn't so healthy.
And one of the really annoying things about this is we've got a study out, that study there that is like, it's conclusive. It's like, yeah, fiber is not good for you.
Yeah.
But and no one's talking about it. But if it was a similar thing, but it's got basically a very, very weak association, there's like meat impacts type 2 diabetes, and it's like shouting for the rooftops as a headline in every newspaper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You got all the news outlets. You got YouTube people going on it. You got some doctors on YouTube looking at this study, being like, "Oh, yeah, it looks like they concluded this." And it's almost like, where did this fiber study go? It just vanished. It completely went into thin air. So that one, I just look at that and I get annoyed by that, because I'm a really great example of, like, I hate experiencing that, because I nearly died. It was so normal for me to feel stomach pain after eating, because I was always brought up on a sort of like pescatarian household in terms of food, a lot of fruits and vegetables and stuff, that when I was growing up, like, I thought after I eat, it's normal to feel pain. I didn't even question it anymore. So it was sort of, to me, it's like, this is ridiculous. I now, after I eat, I don't have to feel pain. Not only do I not have to feel pain, I don't have to feel bloating. I don't have to feel all these other problems that I used to experience. So it's just, that's a personal experience one for me. That's not a science thing. It's just, that's really annoying.
We've really we've really damaged ourselves as a species. You know, I can't imagine any other species. Like, there's no lion sitting there going, every time I eat a gazelle, I feel I feel rotten. I've got this pain. It's just us, and it's because
Yeah.
we are eating the wrong thing.
Yeah, actually, we are literally damaging ourselves as a species. I already talked about this previously on one of my videos, where I talk about, if you look at the anthropology, like humans before and humans after, we can see that humans before, like, we evolved from Miocene hominids to Australopithecus, after that to early Homo sapiens like Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and then after that we went to Middle Pleistocene Homo sapiens, which are things like Neanderthals, and then after that we went to who we are today, which is Homo sapiens. And along that line, our brain size was skyrocketing at around Australopithecus to early Homo sapiens. It just went completely out of this world. And then around a little bit after, actually, Homo sapiens, we noticed our brain sizes weren't actually increasing at the insanely rapid rate. In fact, they decreased at an even faster rate. And it's like, why would the brain sizes decrease at such a fast rate? Because before, our brain sizes were really, really going out of this world, like really, really quick. And if we look at it, the reason is because suddenly 10,000 years ago, that exact same time period where our brain started to shrink, the agricultural revolution came about. And lo and behold, what exactly did that do? Suddenly, humans never had teeth problems before, they never had malocclusion, they never were dying of cavities over and over again. Like, suddenly, oh my God, now I actually need to brush my teeth, or I need to do something with my teeth because I'm literally dying from gum inflammation, cavities, tooth decay. It's terrible. And that started exactly around the time in the agricultural revolution. And brain sizes also shrank at that exact same time. So you look at that and it's like, that's a little, yes, it is correlational, but that's definitely a little bit strange. There's nothing else. Like, what other thing in human history caused this exact problem to start happening? Like, it wasn't just tons of genetic defects out of nowhere. Like, that is so rare.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to believe that somehow, in our development, our bodies kind of went, "No, this brain's getting too big for our head. Let's shrink this down a little bit."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, if that did happen, if it did happen like that, it would happen slower. It would happen at like a lower rate. But the rate that it's happening is like, it's like, literally, quite literally, birth defects are happening, or like problems are starting to happen. This species has been exposed to like radiation suddenly, and all these problems start occurring. It doesn't add up. So yeah.
I definitely think the jaw is another thing. The stuff with the teeth. That's a really big signal.
Yeah. 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 That's I personally think that humans are supposed to be like, what you see as a model or attractive. I don't actually think that's supposed to be attractive. I think that's supposed to be what, like, sort of what a normal human is supposed to look like. But during development, it's so crucial to eat certain foods, and it's so crucial to develop your master muscle of your jaw, for instance, especially if you're a man, because it really does show it's an attractiveness trait. There's also whether or not, like, your nose is aligned a certain way, whether or not your jaw as well is also aligned a certain way. Like, if your jaw is just receding, that's really, really considered unattractive. There's also like your eyes and the way your eyes are positioned. And all of this, if you look at it, like, how can you influence this? It all happens at around adolescence. And not only that, for some reason, you can actually fix some of these problems. For instance, Dr. Mike Mew, he literally fixes children's um, posture to the point where they are actually having a better jawline and they're able to breathe through their nose because of it. So this is all related, because if you plug, for instance, they already did this before. They plugged the noses of some monkey. I can't remember which one, with silicone plugs, and they saw what happened to the monkey's face. Exactly what happens to our face when we start breathing through our mouth. Our teeth start basically crowding around. They start basically having all these problems, and lo and behold, that monkey starts looking unattractive. it's not the monkey's unattractive. It's the fact that the monkey's literal, like, its development is being hindered. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, that's a whole different topic, but I think it's really interesting. I think carnivore, especially for kids when they're younger, will most certainly, most guaranteeably, actually, make them more attractive. I can give them a lot of reasons for that, but I probably won't go into that sort of science this video. The next thing I was going to talk about is the cholesterol synthesis cascade. Now, the cholesterol synthesis cascade, you might have heard about this before from Elizabeth Bright. And yes, I've learned this from her. And Elizabeth Bright, she talks about this. And pretty much cholesterol is really important because every single steroid sex hormone, or almost every single one of them that you need, for instance, the androgens like testosterone and DHT, really, really important. The ones like estrone, estradiol, estriol, the three estrogens. There's also allopregnenolone, really important in regulating mood, which sort of would make sense as to why vegans get very, very moody or very angry sometimes, to say the least. There's aldosterone, really important in regulating blood pressure. Lo and behold, yeah, this is, again, that one you can just fix with cholesterol and salt, for that matter. Salt will fix the blood pressure problems. That's a completely different topic, but it's really interesting. Like, for instance, the glucocorticoids like cortisol and corticosterone, really important in regulating how much weight you're storing. I mean, all this stuff, especially also the newborn pregnancy of some people with pregnenolone. Like, all of this stuff comes from cholesterol, and when you have a deficit of it, what do you get? Well, suddenly you start getting moodiness. You start getting men who have no muscle mass. You start getting women who have PMS pain and PCOS pain, which should have never happened before, because many women also have fixed their PMS and PCOS pain going carnivore. If you go long enough, especially, it does seem to work, because I mean, there's a lot of examples. I mean, I have a video on that as well. It's really, I think it's really, really important for women to know that one, because that's monthly pain is not necessary at all. So there's that also. And that's just cholesterol. Cholesterol is also important for bile acids, basically making the thing that can break down the fat. It's also important for being able to make vitamin D. I mean, it's so important, like cell membrane function, brain function. And you're telling me like cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, is unhealthy? It's like, again, it's like something just didn't exist in their brain, and suddenly, like, other scientists, the worst part is other scientists started to agree with them. It's like, how can we get to this conclusion? So yeah, that's cholesterol. There's also the insulin to glucagon ratio. So this dictates weight gain or weight loss, and this is why meat does cause diabetes, and it doesn't at the same time. Because if you look at it, and if you mix meat with everything, technically speaking, causes diabetes, because it will cause, if you mix everything together, if you mix the carbohydrate and the fat, then you suddenly get this skyrocketing insulin to glucagon ratio. And that is not what you want to do, because when you do that, that's how you get your diabetes in the first place. So the only way that you can get that is by either eating meat with carbohydrate. That's the only way that you can possibly get that. You can't get that otherwise. If you eat meat and only meat, you won't get type 2 diabetes. And if you eat plants and only plants, all for that matter, also, your odds of getting type 2 diabetes are also much lower. It's a little bit higher, but it's not really that much higher. And that's because you're not spiking your insulin to glucagon ratio. So even then, technically speaking, going vegan, which is why some people go vegan, does fix their type 2 diabetes in this case. And it's important to give some credit, at least where it's due to the other side, I think, anyways. So that's something in terms of like why plants are sort of, I wouldn't say they're healthy, but that's why plants can get rid of type 2 diabetes. There's also the Randall cycle. The Randall cycle pretty much dictates the damage to the endothelium, which is sort of linked to the insulin to glucagon ratio as well, because if you try to mix that meat and fat, then it blocks both of them. It blocks the fatty acid out of the mitochondria, and it blocks the glucose out of the cell. And when that glucose gets blocked out of the cell, you get high glucose levels. And once again, we already probably know before of what I talked about anyways, glucose and fructose, they will bind and they will basically cause glycation, and it causes this damage. And not only that, you got more reactive oxygen species going about. Like, it's just this cascading effect of like exponential damage. You don't want to do that. The next thing is carnitine. Carnitine is really, really important. And take a guess where you find carnitine. You find carnitine from meat. Yeah. So carnitine is really, really important. And the reason is because carnitine allows for efficient ketogenesis. And the reason it allows for, ketogenesis, it allows for efficient ketosis. And the reason why it allows for efficient ketosis is because carnitine is the thing that's carrying that long chain fatty acid to the mitochondria. And without that carnitine, you can't carry that long chain fatty acid to the mitochondria in the first place. So if you really, really want to maximize your your results from fasting, for instance, it's actually better to just basically go carnivore because you're increasing the rate of ketosis. And once again, ketosis is very helpful for many reasons. Very, very helpful for many reasons. The next thing is amino acid content. Now, amino acid content in plants versus animals. Okay, I hear this all the time, and it drives me mad. So they always say like certain plant proteins are really high. There's certain plants out there that have really high protein content, like quinoa. That's a really good superfood. And it's like if you look at how proteins work, not only that, if you look at even go to a supermarket and you'll see 9 grams of protein. Like, what does 9 grams of protein mean? Because if you look at it from a science perspective, that makes no sense whatsoever, because it's not telling you how much of that protein you're actually going to use. Because not all protein is just suddenly used like this. Your body doesn't just take protein and go, oh, well, I make protein now. Great. This is helpful. No, it breaks that protein down into amino acids. And the problem is the way amino acids work is, for instance, let's just take this analogy. So you're trying to spell the word knowledge. Now, the way you spell the word knowledge is you need a letter. Specifically, you need the letter K, N, O, W, L, E, D, G, and E. Now, you can basically place the 9 essential amino acids, which is also, that's why I chose knowledge. It's a 9-letter word. You can place each one of those 9 essential amino acids to that letter and assign it to that letter. Now, even if you have a million of every single other letter, except you only have 1 K, you're only going to get 1 bit of protein from that. Your body's only going to be able to make 1. So like this is why this term of like, oh, it's really high in protein doesn't make any sense, because if you look at the amino acid content, that's what's telling you whether or not something is or isn't high in protein. And you have to look at it a little bit further. And if you do, you also realize, oh, wait a second. If you look at the amino acid content of plants, they're so imbalanced because you have 50 E's and you have 1 K here. Like, you're obviously right. You're going to not be able to spell the word knowledge too much. And that's why you see so many vegans emaciated. And it's because they literally can't build muscle. Even if they're getting tons of this protein, they're not actually being able to make any use out of it. And if you look at the amino acid content, for instance, of like animals, specifically meat, it's way, way higher. It's way more balanced. And it's at least like 50 E's to 20 K's. So like at least you're able to spell the word knowledge 20 times. And then if you look at the next one, which is eggs, which is the highest, it's around like 30 K's to 50 E's. So it's way, way higher. It's like, that's why these bodybuilders are eating so many eggs. It's because the amino acid content, it has nothing to do with this protein content, once again. So I hear that all the time with the protein stuff, and that drives me crazy, because I'm like, if you really want to be building muscle, eat what's high in protein. And where do you get that stuff high in protein? That's right. You get it from meat. You get it from eggs, specifically eggs. That's why Arnold Schwarzenegger, just look at Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime. What was he eating? He was pretty much carnivore. He was like pounding down tons of raw eggs over and over and over again. This guy was out of this world.
I bet you there wasn't much quinoa being consumed then.
Yeah, but not much quinoa there, huh? What a surprise. I wonder why he excelled so much, right? So why was he the best bodybuilder? I wonder. It must have been his genetics. It's like, guys, come on. Like, yes, his genetics played some role, but it's his literal diet. It's what he's eating. So yeah, that one just drives me crazy. There's also the digestive tract. I talked a little bit about that before. We use the exact same fuel source than herbivores. We use fatty acids. Herbivores use fatty acids. The only difference is we get our fatty acids from eating meat. They get their fatty acids from eating fiber. Now, the funny thing is, even herbivores themselves will suddenly become carnivores if they have the option. Literally, like chimps will eat other little monkeys. That's another example. That's a really, really clear example. You look at that and you go, that shouldn't be happening. Clearly, herbivores are supposed to be eating plants, right? Nope. When they have the opportunity, they will eat. They will eat other animals. And another example would be deer. You might think deer are harmless. Turns out deer will eat little birds when they have the opportunity. Same thing with horses, for that matter. I mean, if you really look at this stuff, it's like there's a reason why things sort of have there's a reason why these animals are eating other animals, and it's because the nutritional content and that fatty acid content once again. So yeah, that one sort of drives me crazy when I hear like, oh, we shouldn't eat animals because it's like it's not ethical. And there's a lot of arguments you can make behind that. But even other herbivores themselves are eating herbivores. Like, isn't
Uh,
this really some sort of an indicator? I don't know.
one of the arguments that I hear a lot is, but these some when you look at herbivores altogether, like on average, they live longer. And it's like, yeah, because there's two examples or something in there that live for 1,000,000 years. And so that brings the average up. It doesn't mean that everyone is living for a long time.
It's mostly because of once again, it's actually, I would say it has to do with polyunsaturated fat content, and it also has to do with size, because size does seem to play a pretty big role in it. Yeah, there's I have a video sort of on that. It's not, I can't go into the science too much on that right now, though. The next thing, though, is the Harvard study. Now, you might have actually heard about this one, the Harvard study of 2020. Did you hear about that one?
My ears typically close when I hear Harvard study these days. So, it's about
This one
diabetes.
shock you. It is a Harvard carnivore study. Yeah, Harvard did a carnivore study. And what did they find out? Well, lo and behold, Harvard put these people on the carnivore diet. It took like 3,000 people or something. It's an epidemiology. So already you probably assume that the validity of these are not going to really be too accurate. You won't see super big results. Suddenly you have 99% of people not using their type 2 diabetes medication. You have 99% of people, 93% of people losing tons and tons of weight. You have like literally all there, it's all in the 90% range. And all of these problems are being cured. Acne gone, like every single thing, you can name it, right? And they're like, oh, well, clearly this is a really big step for like seeing whether or not the carnivore diet is good, right? And what ends up happening? Oops, suddenly Harvard 4 years later starts denouncing that study that they once were really like happy about and being like, oh yeah, it's the best thing in the world. And why is that? And this brings us to our next thing, which is the SDA and them sort of doing some shady stuff. Yes, the SDA is involved in part of the, let's say, paying off of that Harvard study.
So just for people that may not have heard of SDA, what's SDA stand for?
SDA stands for Seventh Day Adventist, and they pretty much were all about like, oh, plants are really healthy. And the reason, if you actually do a little bit digging into it, you realize the reason they say this is because their prophet, Ellen G. White, ended up saying, hey, plants are really healthy. And actually, they're not actually really healthy. It's more so meat is bad. And why is that? Because meat is considered sinful because it causes lust. And remember, lust is a sin. So therefore, meat is bad. And yeah, so they sort of ended up trying to drive the thing away from meat. And lo and behold, you have what you have today. Kellogg, Graham cracker, Sylvester Graham, all of those things, they come from the Seventh Day Adventist. And the final thing that I was going to say was, if you look at one of the best studies, in my opinion, the Minnesota Coronary Heart Survey, you can see that the Minnesota Coronary Heart Survey was funded by the exact same people who funded the Framingham Heart Study, which said, hey, I think that LDL cholesterol is very unhealthy. The Framingham Heart Study had no results for this, by the way. Their results were inconclusive. In fact, they said that it has no correlation whatsoever. But yet the authors still said there's clearly must be some link. And then we look at the Minnesota Coronary Heart Survey, funded by the exact same people, the National Institute of Health. And who funds that National Institute of Health? Who funds the NIH? Who funds all of these things? Yeah, that's right. It's the SDA once again. The SDA even invented the whole Dietetics Association in 1915. It's corruption galore. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's why when you've got people that have studied nutrition, and they try and lecture you about stuff, it's just like, how can I take you seriously? Because I don't know where the funding for your education has come from.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really big one. All of the funding pretty much, or a lot of it anyways. So, like for instance, the SDA books. SDA funds the books that they for their own dietetic schools, like Loma Linda, for instance, right? And then you have Loma Linda cranking out all these vegetarians and cranking out all these people saying like plants are healthy, plants are healthy, plants are healthy. And it's because they're literally given the book that's saying, yeah, this is why plants are healthy. Look at this study, look at this study, look at this study, look at this study. And if you look at the real validity of that study, where that study might have been funded as well, you look at it and go, that's not really so accurate. That seems a little bit suspicious. I mean, in fact, so much of science itself quite literally is bought out today. Like 96.2% of cancer research, it was like, I would consider, I don't know if I'd say bought out, but I would consider it useless. There's so much fraudulent stuff going on in science right now. It's insane. Same thing with psychology. Same thing with all these other sciences. It's fraudulent stuff galore. I have a video on that as well. That one's pretty it's sad, but it's true.
Yeah, it's just this tangled web of deception. It's crazy, and we just buy into the whole thing as we're growing up, you know.
Exactly. It's messed up. It really is messed up, in my opinion. I don't like it, but hey, that's the world we live in, I guess. And I'm here to hopefully make it better. I'll try. I'll try to spread the word.
So, just on that, can you tell us where can we find your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel, you can find it at Blaise V. So it's basically where you see my name. It says at Blaise V. Pretty much, you just copy that exactly into YouTube, and you'll find my channel. I have about 2,200 something subscribers. I plan on making a lot of carnivore content and finishing the whole science behind carnivore thing. But not only that, I don't think that it should end at just carnivore, and I don't think that I can necessarily cover the science behind carnivore over and over and over again, because it's a little repetitive. And I think it's sort of important to add certain other things. For instance, you can even add like quite literally, you can add some physics, like quantum mechanics. I plan on adding that to my channel as well a little bit. I plan on adding some other interesting sort of like thought experiments. It's like, maybe it's better to be a generalist because of this. I also have a video on like luck, or coming out on why luck actually is a skill, and it's not something that is just random. You can actually train luck. I think you can anyways. And I show this from a perspective of quantum mechanics and entropy. So there's a lot of stuff behind it. And I think that you can really, if you know how the world works and you have a better understanding of the world. I also plan on talking about, like, for instance, a lot of people are always like, oh, politicians are corrupt and this is evil, right? And it's like, well, let's look at it from their perspective. Let's see, why exactly are they so corrupt? Why do we always see dictators become even more malevolent when the next dictator gets overthrown? Suddenly the next dictator is worse, right? Well, why is that? So I plan on making a video on that as well, because they have to play a game, and it's not I wouldn't necessarily say it's a pretty game. It's not fair, but they have to play it. And there's a lot of really important things just to learn, because when you learn this stuff, you go, oh, this is why the world works the way it does. It's not just this whole like, suddenly I am the evil meat god, something. And meat is evil, and Ellen G. White in her whole, oh, meat is a sin, right? It's like, no, it's there's some sort of thought process behind this. It's not just random and out of nowhere. So
No worries. Well, I'll I'll link to your channel in the show notes. Blaise, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dave, for having me on. I'll definitely try to come back on. It's definitely a lot of fun talking with you.